Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the All Around Growth Podcast, the show that provides insight and tools to build the life and homestead of your dreams. Today is Friday, January 7th, 2022. This is episode number 259 of the show, if I'm not mistaken. My name is Rob Kaiser, and I am your host. Before we get into today's show, and we read from the rudder of the day, I'm going to begin with a quote by Henry David Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. It was when I read that this morning, my friends, that I decided today we would again read from the rudder of the day. There is good content in all of these devotionals, but this one in particular struck a chord with me, and accordingly, this is going to be a bit of an introspective episode, one where I do a bit of reflecting on my past, and that might lead into some discussion about the present as well as the future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and read from the rudder of the day. And the title of today's reading is called Work 6 Weeks a Year. Is getting more stuff always a reasonable goal? Henry David Thoreau spent the better part of his life writing about man's attempt to find truth and meaning through simplified living. At some point, he discovered he could live within the harmony and beauty of nature with a clear conscience and only work 6 weeks a year to support his lifestyle. Henry found it difficult to find a teaching job that matched his style, so he worked briefly in his father's pencil factory. At age 28, Thoreau built a small house on Walden Pond and began to devote his time to writing. Advocating the simple life, his Walden journey began with, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. Quote, and in the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years. Close quote. Abraham Lincoln. This does not describe the typical journey of a college graduate today. Rather, the expectation is an immediate six-figure income and the lifestyle that accompanies success. We live in a society that embraces indulgent consumption as a visible status symbol. The fabulous house tells everyone that you have arrived, even if it takes two incomes and being trapped in an unfulfilling job to make it work. The house then sets the expectations for the country club membership, private schools for the children, and attendance at the right social events. We work longer hours to pay for the new stuff and then have less time to enjoy it. We plead with God to bless us, but the only relief from the self-imposed pressure would be to win the lottery. Where do we draw the line on consumption if we can afford the extras? Do you really need all the house you qualify for? Should we really thank God for providing when we finance a car purchase equal to an annual income? Is a vacation in the Caribbean that much more satisfying than spending a week on a needy Indian reservation? Is it truly God's will that we buy into the bondage of debt? How can we give generously when payments are overdue? Perhaps we, like Thoreau, could take time to savor the beauty of nature around us and to smell the fresh flowers of everyday life. Simplify, simplify. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And finally, before the question for today that provides some direction for the day, we'll take a quote from the Bible. I'll read a passage from Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may become content without God. And if I am too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name. And the question for direction for today: what would your life look like if you really had a simple life? Okay. Again, what would your life look like if you really had a simple life? I would like to think that this is something that I've been working towards, striving for, a simple life. But oftentimes, what I'm realizing is that while my life is simple, it is oftentimes also very busy. Okay? Not necessarily full, but busy. Busy corrupts the simple. Full accompanies it quite nicely. A balanced life can walk in tandem, pairs nicely with a simple life. A busy life is scattered. That's it. I have been reading and have been a fan of Henry David Thoreau since my late teens. I remember reading Walden as a teenager, and even then having it resonate with me, and for reasons that I fully didn't understand. Perhaps still don't. But this quote of going to the woods because we wish to live deliberately, and discovering that we had not lived when it came time to die is something that stuck with me for my entire life. In large part, that's why I named my business Deliberate Living Systems. The business is not a failure. At one point, I called it that. I was prepared to let everything go. I was advised not to by my accountant, who said no harm could come from keeping it open, not shutting it down. He said, you might change your mind. And he was right. I did. Changing our minds is one thing, taking action and doing something about it is another. When I realized that my life wasn't the simple life that I had wanted, well, let me begin a different way. I don't that it almost has a negative sound to it, but generally in all places where I've lived in my life, whether it was Colorado, North Carolina, California when I was living by myself, excluding the relationship I had, even here back in Ohio and back in Iowa when I was in an interim project there, doing project work down in Texas. I've been on the move a lot, and in order to do so, that has required a certain level of simplicity in life, because up until I moved to the farm and homestead where I am here, the longest place I had ever resided, or the longest I'd ever resided in a single residence, was about 18 months, and the longest period of time that I had resided in the same county, the same city area, was 4 years. Except that wasn't even the same county. Yeah, it was. Buncombe County, North Carolina. Being back here in Ohio, and this is, as I said, Friday, January 7th, 2022. I've been back here for a little over 8 years. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yes, that's correct. And when I first came up with the idea of this business, which was immediately upon my arrival back in 2014 after attending the very first Permaculture Voices conference back in California, from where I came, or from where I returned, I was so inspired by everyone. I began chasing their dreams, and I've talked about this at length in the past, and I'm not going to get into it in great detail today, but this process and this chase with no plan, or with a poor plan, led me to getting deeply in debt, losing all sense of who I was, where I was going. And a good analogy would be as though I myself were a ship without a rudder, just effectively floating in the open seas. Not quite out of control, but almost. So in the process of trying to gain control over my life, it all began with my finances. And if you were thinking to yourself what your life would look like if you really had a simple life, but you didn't know how to answer that question, and you're still in debt at this point, then I would strongly encourage you to check out Financial Peace University by Dave Ramsey. And even though the program has changed over the years and it's moving more towards a digital app-based type of platform, just like everything else in the world, it doesn't mean the structure and the framework has changed. Doesn't mean the baby steps have changed. And the reason I bring that up and continue to stress this is that it wasn't until I reached that point myself, after years of diligence and consistency and a mindset and lifestyle geared towards that. It wasn't until I reached that point and had something resembling an emergency savings fund that I began to think with some clarity and see the other aspects of my life with without the pressure that I used to see it through when I had the burden of debt weighing over my head. The reality was I was living paycheck to paycheck, but my life sure didn't look like it oftentimes. And what I've learned is that I've been making steps towards the simple life, but everything was out of balance because I was deeply in debt and preaching this life of permaculture and sustainability and regenerative and whatever the new word for that is now, syntropic, I don't know, whatever we call it these days. While I was preaching all of this, I wasn't living it. My actions weren't consistent with my words. And I had a problem with that, so I really disassociated and went gonzo on debt. And now I'm learning how to reintegrate all of those previous concepts that I seemed to be so passionate about into the life that I lead today. And that's partly why I do this show. So I can think about those things and reflect on them, share it with you, much like the content in the past has been shared with me, content that I've utilized myself to learn and grow and become the man that I am today and the man that I have yet to become. And hopefully this is of value to you. And if it is, I would encourage you to check out the show notes for links to anything and everything that I discussed today that seemed noteworthy. And if you like what you hear and you want to connect with more like-minded people like yourself, you can do so on Telegram at t.me/allaroundgrowth. I look forward to seeing you there, and would also encourage you to share the podcast on your social media of choice with a friend, family member, loved one, anybody who you might think benefit from the message that is contained within. This is Rob Kaiser, and thank you.